A 10-year-old girl dead. Now a review finds 5 areas the state's child welfare system needs to improve. That's on this edition of the Arizona's Family Investigates podcast.
Taking you behind the investigation, this is the Arizona's Family Investigates podcast.
And thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. I'm Amy Cutler, joined by senior investigative producer Cody Lillick. This review was started after the tragic death of 10-year-old Rebekah Baptiste.
Do you know how to administer CPR?
Yes, I do, unfortunately.
It was back in July that her father and his girlfriend called 911 in Apache County, claiming that the girl had run away and that she was in need of medical attention. In police body camera video, you can hear what her father, Richard Baptiste, and his girlfriend, Anicia Woods, told that responding officer.
How long has it been since you found her unresponsive?
We don't know. The neighbor brought her.
So that was one of the many questions Richard and his girlfriend, Anicia Woods, struggled to answer. In that body camera video that we have from that scene, Woods tries to explain how Rebekah was injured.
What was becoming alarming to not only her therapist but to the DCS workers was that she started having markings. Like she had bruises on her hands and her arms, and they took pictures and thought Rebekah had told her that we had done it. Okay. And it was her way to try to get taken out. The first time she ran away, she told us that she didn't want to live here. She was just trying to leave. But we explained to her, everyone explained to her the dangers that come with this.
Later in interviews with police, Richard Baptiste admitted to disciplining Rebekah and her 2 younger brothers, and admits that at times that may have went too far. Doctors called what happened to Rebekah torture. Richard and Woods have pleaded not guilty to those charges and remain behind bars.
Now, following an internal investigation, the Department of Child Safety, or DCS, admitted the family was known to them. Later, we'd learned that they were first called when Rebekah was only a baby. At one point, Rebekah and her 2 younger brothers were actually removed from the home, only to later be reunited.
And the school where all 3 kids attended, it's called Empower College Prep. And they also spoke out, saying they had called the Department of Child Safety a dozen times with concerns that it was clear these children weren't being properly cared for. They argued the signs of abuse were there, and DCS ignored them. Since that initial report came out, we've been waiting for more information from DCS.
Yeah, we have been calling and emailing to follow up with them. Then we learned a review of the case was being presented at the next stakeholder meeting. State Senator Karen Warner had brought together DCS, police, foster families, advocates, and tribes calling for change. And that's what these stakeholder meetings were about. And in an exclusive interview, the DCS director, Catherine Patak, agreed to talk to us about that review and the findings.
And according to excerpts of that report that they shared with you, it identified several what they called systemic factors that impacted decision-making and case management. There are 5 of them. First, incomplete information coming from people who call the DCS hotline. The director said at times the teachers or doctors who spoke with the child and actually observed the injuries aren't the ones making that call to the hotline. Instead, it would come from a guidance counselor or a nurse who would call the hotline, and they don't have the full scope of information that needs to be relayed to DCS. And that can make it hard for the call taker to screen in a call or have it properly investigated.
And it's really important to note all of this because in the past, it has been really hard to get information from DCS. We hear of a child being killed. We wait months and months to get any kind of preliminary information from them. These reports are hard to come by. So it was interesting that they would send us excerpts of this review and that the director would agree to go on camera and that they would actually admit mistakes and say that changes were needed. And as part of this, we learned that in only one of the 12 calls that the school made, the teacher who had the concern was the one to actually make that report. We briefly spoke with the executive director of Empower College Prep, again, the school that Rebekah went to, who says it's something that they need to review. But he insisted that they have the proper protocols in place and that they are following them.
Now, the second factor that this review found was the caseworkers. They say there are a lot of factors that need to be addressed there, including high turnover, low pay, intense caseloads, and overwhelmed supervisors. The third factor the review found was a key one in the Rebekah Baptiste case, engaging a parent's significant other. That's important here because Woods was implicated in most of the reports, and courts can't mandate that a significant other participate since they're not the biological parent, even though they may be in the same home as the child.
And this was something when we started looking at the case that I hadn't even considered, the fact that DCS couldn't mandate that Woods participate in any kind of investigation into what was actually taking place inside that apartment.
So theoretically, you could have an instance where they can take action and mandate a biological parent, in this case the father, take action, but they had no enforcement power, they say, over anybody else in that home, whether it be a significant other or anybody else in the home.
Yeah, so it's really it's a balancing act for DCS because they want to get that significant other on board, but they can't make it so that they participate in any kind of review of things. Next up, building relationships with attorneys and judges. DCS explains that with frequent turnover, it makes it tough for caseworkers to get comfortable in that court environment, to have relationships with attorneys and judges. Finally, staff reliance on prior interactions. It found caseworkers are looking at past involvement with DCS, which can influence how they ultimately understand new reports that are coming in.
Understanding how we are using that prior history and that relationship in making current safety decisions.
Tell me a little more about that last one. So how do you go about, because you want caseworkers to develop rapport with families so they're more comfortable sharing information with them?
That's exactly right, and that's something that I think, so we're presenting all of the findings to the multidisciplinary team today, and they'll be giving us some feedback. We're also going to be presenting it to Senator Warner's Stakeholder group, who will be giving feedback as well.
So in your interview, you also talked to the director about that DCS hotline, which we have talked so much about, where these tips basically come from the public or schools or wherever and get reported to the Department of Child Safety, because we know that they received more than a dozen calls about Rebekah and her family from the school, from police, from counselors and social workers who had interaction with those kids.
Some of what we found was that the hotline made the right decision based on the information that was given to them. So even if the tool were maybe different, if they don't have all the information in front of them, they're still going to make a decision with limited information.
We know DCS goes off of a script to answer calls to ensure that their responses are consistent. These calls that don't rise to the level of investigation are then reviewed by supervisors at the department. But the director explained that the vast majority of the time, the script is so detailed, the supervisor agrees with the call taker's decision more than 90% of the time.
And in speaking to the director at Empower College Prep, he was sort of relieved to hear this because he was not aware that there was this oversight, that there were people reviewing the calls, because he heard from, teachers at the school, from different counselors and social workers that all these calls had been made and that they decided ultimately to leave Rebekah in the home. And so that was certainly disappointing and frankly outrageous to a lot of folks at the school. So that was something that he was really relieved to hear. Now, Patak explained that they are already taking action on some of these issues. That includes reviewing the script these hotline workers use. Next up, piloting a program that reduces the supervisor to caseworker ratio from 8 or 9 caseworkers to 1 supervisor to 5 to 1. Next, connecting the nonprofit resource centers to help families in need, basically connecting food, clothing, those basic necessities with families who need that kind of support. Finally, improving communications with police, schools, and DCS. Her message to the community is that DCS is not broken.
This case is incredibly tragic. It's incredibly sad, and the cases like this are what keep every person who works here up at night. It's not indicative of how we function. We get 160,000 calls a month. We investigate 50,000 reports a year.
So she says DCS is not a broken agency, but we have seen case after case in just this past year alone where some would make that argument. There have been high-profile cases of young girls that have died in the custody and care, or people who have been associated with DCS and through the system. So let's talk about this interview a little bit more. Why did the director want to do this interview?
First off, I think it's important to point out that Patak has only been in this role since January. And so a lot of what was involved in Rebekah's cases and 2 other high-profile murders of kids known to the system happened mostly before her time. She was involved in the agency as an attorney, but her time as director has been sort of limited. I think she realizes the importance of getting out front about this. I mean, there have just been so many stories. I mean, we've done a dozen stories on all of this. She knows that that perception is out there, and she's trying to turn it around. And so I think that she's got some smart people on her staff that realize responding to emails, not answering questions is not the way any longer. You know, we've got social media out there, and I think she realizes that, you know, the way to gain trust again is to sort of build some relationships with the community, and that comes with developing relationships with folks, and it comes with speaking out.
So the director made this presentation of this review's findings behind closed doors at these stakeholder meetings that have been happening in response to the 3 high-profile cases that have been in the headlines of Rebekah Baptiste, Emily Pike, and Zariah Dodd. And these have been happening mainly behind closed doors, and mainly with these stakeholders being police, tribal members, and leaders, and also any advocates on behalf of and also the families involved. Talk a little bit about the presentation that was made and how it was received by those in the stakeholder meeting.
So I spoke with folks as they were coming out of that meeting, and I can tell you that they were a little overwhelmed because it was 2 solid hours, at least this last meeting, where it was person after person sort of sharing their experiences, chiming in with what they'd like to see. So I have heard that they have been really productive conversations, that everyone acknowledges that there are changes that need to be made. I mean, in the case of Emily Pike, which we did another investigation into and really took a closer look at her case, it was disturbing to learn that she goes missing. She's a kid in the system. They don't even have a picture of her. They don't even know her history. And so, and that was because she was a member of a tribal community. She ends up in a group home run by DCS. And so there wasn't that communication between police, DCS, her tribe, her family. And so it was not known to them that she had suffered from some mental health issues and challenges, and so that she had this history of running away. And so, I mean, it was just to hear that she had run away and they didn't even have a picture. How can you find someone if you don't even have a picture of them?
Yeah, and so a result out of that was, you know, creating the idea of creating these case files, basically, so that if a child does come up missing, you know, they have that picture, they have the essential information, so that all of the people who need to know, so the home, the police department, and any other agency that may need it, they have it there, it's ready to go in the event that something happens. It just kind of seems a little hard to believe that that never happened.
I know it was really sort of alarming and surprising all at once. But I think it comes down to when you're dealing with tribes, they are sovereign entities, and so they don't have to participate. And so I think that is part of the reason that these are behind closed doors. They want everyone involved to feel that they can talk freely and they don't have to worry about somebody else in the community hearing what they have to say and, you know, maybe being offended by it or being concerned about it. And so they're happening in sort of closed environments with the idea that they can find solutions to some of these issues and start implementing some changes.
Because the whole thought about these stakeholder meetings is that, you know, the thoughts about possible legislation come up in these meetings so that they can then go in and do possible legislation that, will likely get introduced in the new year when the legislative session begins. But some other interesting developments out of this meeting, and I want you to expand a little bit about it. One that was very interesting was no longer using the term runaways. And that is a very strong word that is used in normal language. And so why is it important for them to stop using that word?
There is this perception that when someone runs away, that they want to be lost, that they don't want to be found. And so, but we're talking about kids, in the case of Emily, a child who's 12 years old. In that situation, how can you think that a 12-year-old can live on their own without, some kind of support and resources? So, in our situation, just being in the newsroom, right, we hear about runaways. They come across our assignment desk all the time. And so I think people sort of get numb to the number of these kids that are going missing. And so there's going to be a change here that Senator Warner had really pushed for, which was ensuring that these kids are called missing. Basically, she wants police, whatever entities, to look for these kids. If they can't find them in a short amount of time, they haven't outlined the specifics on that, but if they can't be found, they're not at a friend's house, a family member's house, in a school, in a known spot, then they are referred to as missing. And then they put more resources toward tracking these kids down.
And so what were some of the other issues brought up to address in the meeting? Some forensic exams, and then talking about getting to the root cause of why these children seem to run away. What are some of the other takeaways from this latest meeting?
Yeah, so that forensic exam is really important. And we know that in some situations, kids are waiting months, many months to get these exams. We know in the case of Zariah Dodd, who went missing from a group home, that she was killed before the forensic exam could ever be done into her sexual assault. And so the importance here is to ensure that there is a shorter timeline, be it 48 hours, 72 hours, that it is mandatory that they do those exams in a shorter span of time, so you get that information and police can start investigating those cases. And there has been some issues because not everyone is trained to do exams involving kids like this, obviously very sensitive information. And so the Maricopa County Attorney's Office has agreed to sort of spearhead doing these exams, talking to these kids, doing these interviews. And so as part of this moving forward, there's going to be sort of a set timeline to ensure that each case is taken seriously, they've got the information, and that they can move on it.
And so when it goes to, they also talked about the root cause of kids running away and what triggers police involvement. What did they expand on as far as possible changes in that area or further investigation as far as finding the root cause?
Yeah, so they're sort of looking into some different ideas here. First off, they say it is really important when a child runs away from a group home situation or a foster home that someone sit down with them to get an understanding of why that is. Do they feel unsafe in the home? Do they feel like they're too far away from family? Do they feel disconnected? And so the idea is to get a sense of what is behind them trying to get out of that situation. And then it was really interesting. They mentioned that at a local police department, if a child runs away 3 separate times, that triggers a longer form interview with the child to get a sense of what's going on. And a lot of times these kids in group homes don't have families that care for them, and so they sort of feel lost. And so the senator pointed out that sometimes just having that intervention, showing that care, just basic things really make the difference and show them that they're cared for, that someone would miss them. And so it's, might seem like little things, but they're hoping all of these things together will add up to lasting change here.
It's definitely a heartbreaking conversation to talk about, and legislators are trying to find any kind of solution that they can take in the upcoming legislative session. Senator Werner is working on drafting some of that legislation that may come out of these stakeholder meetings. We're expecting another one in the future. Is that correct?
Yes. So the goal here is to basically they're trying to come up with timelines so that people have a chance to work on possible changes, but not so long that things fall through the cracks. So we know that they've got some communication agreements in place with tribes and police departments, so that's a positive development. They're looking into sort of some of these forensic interviews, determining timelines for that. But the goal here is to have another stakeholder meeting in December to sort of keep the pressure on in the hopes that they can sort of implement some of these new policies, and then whatever they determine might need legislation, that they can start ensuring that they've got drafts of those for the upcoming session.
Yeah, because some of this can get addressed outside of the legislature, and we would not have to wait as long to see implementation. So we will look for the next stakeholder meeting in December and follow the developments out of that. If you have anything you would like to send to us, to the Arizona's Family Investigates team, email us at investigates@azfamily.com. That's it for this edition of the Arizona's Family Investigates podcast.
The Arizona's Family Investigates podcast, hosted by Amy Cutler and produced by Cody Lillick, and a production of Arizona's Family 3 TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.